If you're asking why we, you mean the people that are against it. I think that you'll find that a lot of conservatives are what I like to call family values consequentialists. And they go along with a lot of things. And the moment you start trying to indoctrinate their fucking children and start coming after them with crazy ideology, it's not about a lack of empathy for trans people or for people with gender dysphoria. It's about the ideology and the bullshit that's being pushed on their children.
All right, so topic one. A former Ohio middle school teacher that she was forced to resign after she told her boss that she would not address students by the preferred pronouns because it violates her religious beliefs. Now she is suing the school. Should there ever be religious exceptions when it comes to public interactions? Whether it be schools, immunizations, or the military, should the government respect religious beliefs in any of its mandates? If you believe the government should respect exceptions, what are fair limitations? So yeah, this is pretty much what it sounds like. And the thing with the school just kind of like, gave me the inspiration for this, but I like to expand it beyond that as well to like all aspects of life, because we see these this come up again. And I think the immunization part is actually super interesting because we've seen like outbreaks happen, like in New York, the Jewish Orthodox community, where like rubella or whatever the fuck happens. Like it was really bad. It was super bad. And then the governor, or maybe it was the mayor, I forget, had a fight with them over this. It was super interesting. So where should we respect these things? Or should we just be done with them? Start with Lactoid for introductions.
No, thank you. So I took a look at the article and I was pretty shocked by a lot of stuff that I read. In this situation, I stand with this middle school teacher. Based on the article, the school was being wholly unreasonable in this situation. She offered to move classrooms. She offered to refer to students solely by their legal names or just names, and she also offered to avoid using pronouns completely. I understand that government employees do represent the government, and so they can't take certain positions while in their capacity of their employment, and they can't refuse to do certain things that are critical for their employment. But this teacher was actively trying to avoid taking a position in the classroom. Just because you become a government employee doesn't mean you lose every right that you have. This was not critical to her position. She was more than willing to accept a reasonable compromise, but because she refused to entertain the left's latest social engineering project, she gets canned. I think the implications of this are ridiculous. For example, like the full reductio ad absurdum. What if the preferred pronouns were the N-word? Should the teacher have to say it? Obviously not.
Well,
it's kind of a silly little thing to end on, but
next, Scott.
Yeah, so public schools are a violation of human rights and are supported by taxation and slavery. And so everything that they do is, in effect, in support of taxation and slavery and against human rights. Now that I've gotten the libertarian kind of rage bait out of the way, let's get into the meat of this. I think she has a really strong case because if we look at this from a libertarian perspective, right, which is the right one, and we look at this and we say, okay, what is the role in this situation of the state? And until that stolen property can be returned, their role is to act as in trust of the property that they have taken, and to try to minimize conflict and rights violations during that time. And so that means it has to be open to everyone. That means that they can't discriminate upon anyone. And this is why we have religious freedoms, right? Now, under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, right, it is a law that unless she imposes an undue hardship or an undue burden, right, that they do not get to violate her religious freedoms, whatever those religious beliefs are, so long as she doesn't violate other people's rights or she doesn't produce undue burden. Now, this was established in Morgan v. Virginia, right? This is actually, like, we all know the Rosa Parks story, but the Rosa Parks story only comes about because it was already illegal to have African Americans at the time, right, sit at the back of the bus for interstate travel. And then the South started violating that ruling of Morgan v. Virginia because it was also supposed to apply to any buses that were on national bus stops. And so what we understand here is that with everything that she offered, they really have no argument that she somehow imposed an undue hardship or an undue burden, because she gave multiple different ways that she would be able to act in such a way that wouldn't cost them any additional money, wouldn't require them to hire any additional employees, have anybody else do her job. There was nothing about what they did or their policy needed to change, right? The problem is that schools are completely and utterly taken over by critical pedagogy. That's why pedagogy of the oppressed is has over 100,000 citations, and Paulo Freire is the #1 cited social scientist in all of the world. It is very obvious that these schools are completely captured by Marxist ideology, and because she would not go along with the captured institution and the woke, she was ejected regardless of whatever her opinions are, whether or not you agree or disagree with them. So I think she should sue them. Unfortunately, she'll be paid out in taxpayer money. So it's really an act of aggression on another act of aggression. The only logical conclusion is to abolish public schools.
Only logical conclusion. Thank you so much, Scott.
Mhm.
Let's go to Corey.
So, as usual, I'm a little bit mixed on this, but there's actually some elements that I agree with about Lactoid, in the sense that based off of this article here that I read and went through, it does seem like there was some effort on reasonable accommodation. Although, I don't know that moving her to a different classroom is like the ultimate answer, since I think there's potential for just the same issue occurring over and over again. So yeah, this one seems like really, at least for me personally, gray. But in terms of my overall positions, here's where it's there's this item that's pretty anti-religious. And like Lactoid, I'm Canadian, but I'm a real Canadian in that I'm from Quebec. And Quebec has I think everybody knows Quebec is xenophobic, and they've banned religious symbols all throughout, or at least they've attempted to ban religious symbols all throughout, the public sector, even though they still seem to get away with, Christian symbolism, unfortunately. But that's where I sort of lean towards in terms of answering the prompts of the questions of should there be religious exemption when it comes to public interactions? I tend to lean heavily towards no, and that's whether it be schools, immunizations, the military. I don't really have a lot of respect for most, if not almost all, religious beliefs. And I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Corey, for being short and sweet and concise, right? Only some others would learn that. Let's go to Ruminate.
Yeah, so I'm kind of going to echo Corey a little bit here. When the topic was given to me and I did some research on it, I was found that I'm surprised to learn that I was more split on the issue on the particular case than I expected I would be. Like Lactoid said, the lawsuit that the teacher is alleging says that she was open to being relocated to a different classroom, or that she volunteered to use legal names, or so that there were a number of options there. So I think she probably has a compelling legal case, but I'm not an attorney. Now, in principle, just broadly speaking, because the teacher, is a public servant, I think that her religious liberty, personally, to me, I am more inclined to default to consideration for the students, right? Because they're part of the LGBTQ community, they're non-binary, they're a marginalized group, they're particularly stigmatized, they have a high rate of suicidality and suicidal ideation. So it's I feel like more consideration should be granted to them, and the public space is where the teacher's religious liberty is the most constrained out of any. It's not like a private religious school. So in principle, my sympathies are with the student. But I think in this particular case, given the alternatives alleged in the lawsuit, I think she probably has a strong case to make. That said, I know Scott said that this actually might be a Title VII of the Civil Rights Act violation for the teacher. From what I was reading, it actually might be a Title VII violation on behalf of the students, because I think the case might be made that she discriminated on basis of gender identity for religious purposes. So anyway, that's where I stand. In principle, I'm with the students, but in this particular case, I think she's probably got a strong case to make in court. And I think she's also suing to get her job back, not for a cash payout. So,
Cake.
Yeah, I am going to disagree with the prevailing sentiment that that one, she has a case, or that uh, everyone was saying she's basically uh, let me go at this a different way. The story only cites the teacher. The story in the article do not cite any administrators, any principals. It's the most favorable version of the story we're going to get. So of course, reading that article, it's going to seem as though the teacher is looking better than she otherwise would. Another thing I would like to point out is she had in there quotes from her legal team, and one was, yeah, all these accommodations I'm willing to make. She specifically said I was willing to list legal last names. I think there's a hidden implication there that she was battling with the school over her unwillingness to speak first names that the children preferred. I think this woman was probably combative. I think that we're reading an article that favorably states her thoughts and her quotes because no other comments or quotes were listed aside from her own and her legal teams. Further, I think that people's religious freedoms end where other people's personal freedoms begin. I don't think there's any place for religion in a school. I taught science for multiple years, and not a single one of my students ever knew that I was an atheist, because I think that's highly inappropriate for a teacher to push their own beliefs on a student. You should be fostering an environment in which a student can come to their own conclusions.
So much. Fair enough. Giga
You know, they were quoted as saying she would be required to put her beliefs aside as a public servant. Like, how would you disagree with that, Cake? Like, that, how can you say that it was in her favor when you have a quote from the school saying she would be required to put her beliefs aside as a public servant? It's a direct violation of the Civil Rights Act.
Well, hold on. Well, we can adjust them later. Just like get your thoughts out there.
Okay.
And then
well, obviously you see where I'm going with this, and you know, whether or not she's a government employee, I don't believe that's relevant to the story. In actuality, I could be wrong, but I do believe she is afforded the same civil rights as a civilian, and so I think that right away should be very clear that it really shouldn't matter whether she's a government employee or not, because the Civil Rights Act does apply in this particular scenario, at least. And at the end of the day, look, you know, it is documented, well documented, what the school's response was to her request for reasonable accommodations. And, you know, it just seems pretty black and white to me. I mean, you want to argue otherwise, sure, but it's documented. There's quotes on both sides, and it's simple as that. Like, you could argue, and somebody's mentioned that, well, the students might have a case against the teacher, and it just doesn't work like that. The law does not work like that.
Go Lewis.
Yeah, once again, Brian, thanks for having me. Just for sake of consistency, so that everybody's kind of on the same page, neither the school nor Ms. Garrity disclosed any type of accommodations. This is directly from the lawsuit, paragraphs 86 and 88. 86 says, quote, defendants did not explore the possibility of transfer to a different class, although defendant DiLoretto has the discretion to transfer students, and transfer would have been feasible given the total enrollment of 1350 students at Jackson Memorial Middle School. And then paragraph 88 says, quote, Mrs. Garrity did not raise issue of transfer or explore specific potential accommodations because she did not expect that she would be forced to resign as soon as she experienced her religious basis for being unable to participate in her students' social transition. Based on the lawsuit in question, I'm not exactly sure what type of remedy she's looking for. They listed a bunch of recommendations in the suit itself. Generally, I'm not too sure how this is going to fly, only because we give religious accommodations to teachers all the time, and generally speaking, the guidance is if the religious accommodation doesn't directly interfere with the educational environment. So if she were to transfer into a different classroom, there's still the possibility of her running into an issue of social transitioning within the educational environment. It's important to know also that she was not tenure, so she might or might not. I was looking into figuring out how the union works, specifically in Jackson local schools, but I wasn't able to find that before the panel started, just because of time constraints. Maybe if it's like different, I'll put a like referendum in the group chat later. But generally, I side with the district here. I think it was the right call to make. I do believe that There is a type of remedy that they could do, some type of settlement outside of the situation. I don't think if I was in her situation, I'd fight for my job because it would just run into the exact same problems. I do believe the school could have done some type of process to transition her into a different position, but at the same time, it would have to be some type of non-student facing position so she wouldn't have to run into that problem. So, but again, like that would be in a very extraordinary accommodation for one person on the basis of their religious beliefs. So generally, we make religious accommodations to teachers all the time, but when it comes to rights in particular, she as a teacher has a right to respect her students' gender identity and the social transition process. And if she doesn't want to honor that, that's fine. Then I don't know what type of resolution that she was looking for exactly. Because again, I don't think a transfer would have been sufficient. So I think what she could have done is just fight through it and see what happens and wait till a formal complaint and just do personal accommodations on her own. But she chose not to do that. And we'll see how the rest of the case goes.
And Doobie.
I'm actually pretty torn on this one. I'm torn between thinking that the kids are a little bit fucked for like trying to pull their teacher into their weird delusional role play thing they've got going on, and the teacher is a little bit fucked for trying to like impose her own like weird religious views on the classroom, given that she's like a public servant being paid by the public. Like that's a little fucked. So I'm pretty torn, to be honest with you. I think I could go both ways of this.
Over to the panel. Owen, start.
So go ahead, Lactoid.
I just like what would be the issue with her just not using pronouns at all, right? If that was all she wanted, like, look, because think about it, right? You're not engaging in the conversation. You're just saying you're not like taking a position necessarily. You're just completely staying out of it. Why is using somebody's pronouns critical to her job as a teacher?
Respecting the children.
I have a wild, uneducated assertion to make in response to that. I bet that was probably a completely fine resolution that she was unwilling to do. I bet she was upset that she was needing to call them by their name and was therefore unwilling to engage in what she thought was placating their delusions.
That's
I
possible.
think she should have
but
done it
You got-
further.
I think that to answer Lactoid's question, that isn't using pronouns like an essential part of social transitioning as recommended
Yes.
by like the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association.
Doesn't matter.
Well, that's not the question though. So I looked.
Doesn't matter.
Here's the thing, Cake. Like it could be the case.
What do you mean it doesn't matter?
That's essential to her job because part of policy.
Here's
social
why.
transitioning.
Here's why, right? So like Cake, if it's true what you're saying, which I guess neither of us know because I can only see what the
Yeah, I
information is.
definitely don't know that.
Right. So everything I've seen so far seems to indicate that she's okay with doing that. Okay, at least now she is. Right. At the time, I can't say. We'll have to see how this shakes out, whether or not she was or wasn't.
Oh, you're talking to Cake. I'm sorry, I thought you were talking to me. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so if it's the case that she actually was being obstinate and just saying, no, I'm just going to refer to them by the pronouns they don't want to be called. I mean, that would be one thing. But, I'm not sure how much disagreement you're going to get at that point, right? So
I think you guys are
it's fair
focused on
use-
what is considered petty, and it's irrelevant. Yes, she's probably in this particular case. No one's going to argue that, no matter what side you're on. Whether she's being petty is irrelevant, though. This is a legal matter.
It's not about being petty, though.
And I know, but I've seen a lot of you guys like sort of bring that into the conversation, and I think we can all agree that yes, at the end of the day, it is petty, is irrelevant to the story. The point is, does she have a legal case? And from the moral perspective, is it right or wrong? Now, petty. What is petty? What is not? Irrelevant, in my opinion.
I don't know if
Why
that's
would I-
engaging
But
in
you're
sexual
but you're,
assault.
you're absolutely wrong that she has a legal case anyway because the trans rights take precedence and it's school policy. Her religious rights don't transcend school policy. She's a public servant.
You're arguing
She's gonna have a
semantics
hard-
because
do
you
we
could
know
use
that
the same
these- do we
argument
know
versus
that
the other
these
way. You
kids-
could flip it around.
Do we know that these
It's
kids
not
had, like,
necessarily
were
true, by the
actually-
way.
Oh God. Do we know that these kids were actually diagnosed with gender dysphoria? Like, did they actually
No.
have diagnosis?
No,
Does it-
Okay,
No,
well then
that's
why,
not
then why should
information.
their rights?
That's
Why
not-
should their rights
no,
take
just to
precedent
be-
over the religious rights?
Just to be
So,
clear, that's not
Joe,
information.
then Corey.
that's not information that they'd be able to disclose because of FERPA, so we wouldn't know.
Corey.
Okay, so assuming that they didn't, why would their rights take precedent over their
I
religious
wouldn't
right?
even feel comfortable with assuming because it's protected under FERPA.
So
Okay, but there's a presumption that
Corey,
she had
There's no presumption.
complaints made lobbied against her from
Let's-
students,
Let's
or would
let-
they not
because
be
if
able to
you-
know
no,
that?
to be clear,
Corey.
if you are complying to social
Mm-hmm.
transitioning and then a student violates that, a student can file a formal complaint, or another staff member, another professional.
You mean
to
if the teacher violates that?
Right.
Social
Corey,
transitioning
I
is
said-
not
I said
law.
Corey, shut up.
Student.
Shut up, Corey.
I'll be quick and I'll let Scott and Joe get back. So lactoid, just to like clarify your because to me this boils down to just like how do you refer to your students, and like would it be your position that it's only the legal name on paper that the teacher should be using, and like let's say if a child like prefers like a nickname, which I think I don't know if attendance still happens in schools, but I think it happens where it's like they call out attendance the legal name. It's like, no, call me this. Are you against that?
So, I mean, if for some reason the teacher has some like major problem with a nickname, so like let's say the nickname is something that the teacher finds like personally objectionable, I think there should always be some kind of like, as long as it's not like critical to her position, it's not like disruptive to the classroom. If you just say like their name, or if you just call them by their last name, which is one of the arguments that is being put forward. I mean, again, like as long as it's applied equally here, to me that just looks like you're trying to stay out of the conversation, right? Look, because ultimately this is a political discussion, right? Whether or not this is a thing is a political discussion, and this teacher wanted to stay out of that political discussion, but she's being forced to engage in this political discussion.
That's not necessarily.
I think it's funny you guys give so much weight to children these days as well. Like growing up when I was in school, like what your teacher said went. Like there's a little rule of the land. And I don't know why, and I believe that's one of the reasons why kids are misbehaving today is we allow so much responsibility, or we let kids decide so many things that they shouldn't maybe.
Yeah,
This
when
is-
previous
child
school tells
has
us
a-
to follow him
child
into
has
the
a
gym
right
locker
to-
room, we should listen to
Gigadate
him because he's
A
a
child has a
Gigadate 'em.
right to
Gigadate 'em.
assert their identity. I don't
Gigadate
yeah,
'em.
and their autonomy.
Gigadate 'em.
Yeah, and they have the right to
Gigadate 'em.
choose whether they want to go
oh my
through
God.
a gender transformation. Yeah, go ahead.
Gigadate
Okay,
'em.
go ahead and take
Gigadate
that
'em.
argument.
Yeah, I'll take
Gigadate
that
'em.
argument. Hold on,
Okay,
man.
I do want to
Gigadate 'em.
hear.
Jesus.
I want Scott to
Gigadate
stop
'em.
saying the word. So please, Scott, go ahead. Fuck.
There you go. So the answer to that question is generative concepts and generative themes. If you actually read the ideology that these people are fucking taught in the education through critical pedagogy, you'll understand that it's explicitly designed to destroy the barriers between authority figures and explicitly to have children as equals and as equal voice in the authority of the education process, and that you're supposed to find things that you can decodify and that you can push ideological frameworks through. So that's the answer to where
You're
this
under the
came from.
assumption
so-
that you're under the assumption that is a good thing.
No,
No, he is not.
No, he's
No,
not.
I am not.
You're gonna find out pretty quickly. And I'll just a spoiler alert: Scott is an ANCAP. Just let's get that, throw it out there. But so to kind of address that point or speak to it.
Spoiler alert, Corey's a fucking commie. He just
Yeah,
wanted-
I'm a totally a deranged radical lefty. I will gladly wear that label.
Knew it.
So spoiler alert to you, right, Lactoid? So I would more reframe this as like, as you referred to, reference Gigadatum, of like before it was all like teachers, the authority, and that children, like they have no say. I think we are seeing, I think understandably and a good thing, just as, medicine traditionally was seen as paternalistic and like what the doctor says goes. Now it's more of a consultant fashion where it's like, okay, actually what the patient wants actually matters. And I think the same thing holds true when it comes to education. And where before it was like all teachers and what the teacher says goes, well, maybe there's something you can actually take the child's input into account. And this might be an argument in favor of that.
It
So what
could
you're
be,
saying
but at the
is
end
that
of the
you'd
day,
argue in favor of parental rights over the state because you think that there should actually be involvement from the people that are actually able to consent in the process. So like a doctor, right? Instead of them being the lord of the individual, it's the consumer. It's the person that's purchasing the service. Just what you're saying is that you would actually support, for example, parental rights and education bill in Florida so that parents can have a say since they're the individuals that are the guardians of the emergent will of the child involved. Or are you just bullshitting and you really think the state goes, but like you're okay with this new kind of commie gobbledygook that's being presented in the schools as well?
Oh, well, there's a lot to unpack there that I would love to. So to answer your question, I don't think I've ever made the argument of abolishing all parental rights. And I think it would depend on the context. And I will also fully recognize that there are some instances where I'd be fully in favor of stripping parental rights if they're awful parents.
What about neo-pronouns? What do you guys think about that? Like, is it
They're
just
fine and recognized. My principal uses them.
so? Okay, so I guess again the
What about
reduction.
emote pronouns?
Wait.
You
Yeah,
know what I
here's
mean?
the
Like,
here's the
that's a new
reduction.
fucking thing.
I'm
Heart
just-
emoji is a
I'm
fucking
just-
pronoun now.
I'm just curious, like where, like, is
far
there
you
a
willing
line?
to go?
Like, is there actually a line here, or can we just keep going?
Probably
Where's your
what
line,
gets
Joe?
adjudicated. I
Anybody?
mean,
Anybody got a line?
Wasn't the one guy that
understand
said
the
like your majesty?
Let me ask you guys. Let me ask you guys a question. All right, say it was a student in the classroom, a peer, and they did not want to refer to that individual by their preferred pronouns or name. How would you feel about that? Would you
They can
think it'd be the
report them
same
on-
argument?
They can report them on their HIB, and that would be dealt with guidance.
No, I'm dead serious. Like, how
That's
would
the
you
answer.
treat
That's
it?
the
I
answer.
I can't believe you
I
bite that
understand. I
bullet.
mean,
You're just
like-
like the students will watch each other, and so that they can be the fucking
Yes, if-
antagonists.
I mean,
against
Kate
the
can-
social
Kate can-
struggle.
oh my
let
goodness.
Joe get it out. Let Joe get it
Oh
out.
my goodness, I'd love to finish this. Kate can attest to this too. And anybody in any type of educational environment, if you see another student participating in harassment, that student or the person observing that harassment.
Whoa!
I
Your
would love to
harassment?
finish. I
No,
would love to finish
no.
what I'm saying.
Let-
I would
that's
love to
not-
finish
that's
what I'm
non
saying.
sequitur.
I would love
Let
to
him
finish
get it
what I'm-
out, and
what
then
I'm
you can
saying.
respond. Go ahead, Joe.
If a
Unequivocally
student,
harassment.
if a student observes behavior or or an educational professional, whether it be a staff member, whether it be a member of support staff, a teacher, etc., if they observe any type of behavior that they could perceive as harassment, they can report that to HIB, and that will be reported to guidance, and that would go to the necessary parties, and then an investigation would take place. And once it hits HIB and counseling, it's kind of like out of the hands, and they could determine investigation and find out it wasn't bullying. They could do an investigation to find out that it was. There's a bunch of different routes that happen there.
That
So
sounds
if a
consistent
student
with my
was brought up
experience,
in a religious household and they refused, just like the teacher, to go by their preferred names or pronouns, under the
Time out.
religious exemption
What
rule, that would not
imaginary
apply.
religious household are you growing up in where they're teaching their kids that pronouns are something?
If
that
we're in
exists in-
if we live in a day and age where we're teaching our kids the opposite, why is it so unfounded to think that, well, there are households out there that would prefer
Because
their
that's
children
not a
to?
thing. It's
I
not a
understand what
thing.
you're talking
Can you
about.
say with
Right.
absolute certainty that it is not a
when the
thing?
story is
I
about a
under-
woman who literally is using her religious
Because
beliefs
she's
to
full
say
of
that she's not-
shit. It's not
That's
her
bullshit.
religious
That's
beliefs.
nonsense. Stop it.
It's not
No.
her religious beliefs.
That's
Gigaton,
nonsense.
can you
I'm
run
sorry,
that
it's
back
nonsense.
again? I had no idea what you
Cake,
said.
real quick.
So
Cake,
why
we've been on Cake. You've been on this panel for a couple of minutes, right? Like not even like an hour, right? And in this time, you've made multiple wild assertions with zero evidence.
Yeah,
You have
that's
not backed up a single thing you've said. You even openly admitted that you're not backing up what you're saying.
correct.
So
yeah.
so just stop if you could.
Wait, okay. Why wouldn't it be considered harassment to try to compel my speech, right? So that I play along with your weird fucking LARP pronouns. And if I don't play along with your LARP pronouns, you're gonna fucking report me to the principal or have me sent to the fucking office or whatever. Like, why isn't
Harassment
that
is a
harassment?
deliberate act. Harassment is a deliberate act in order to make someone feel like shit, right? I think we can all pretty much agree on that general definition. And so to harass another kid, we need to deliberately put them down for said pronouns. But somebody simply avoiding saying the term, like in the teacher's circumstances, you're going to actually say that's harassment?
No.
Compelled
Okay,
speech.
then
it's
there you go.
unconstitutional.
It's not harassment. I don't know where harassment came from. That's not
No,
the
because
argument
the
that I
point
have made.
no,
That's not
no,
the
so
that is not the
I
situation I
didn't-
presented. That was
Sorry
not
for-
harassment. Simply
sorry
someone
for cutting-
refusing to acknowledge someone's fucking name is not harassment.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off there, but the thing that what I heard you say was that if they were to use pronouns that were inconsistent with their gender identity, but now you're saying like different types of different.
I think I
types
said
of-
just refuse to use theirs, but if I said use other
yeah,
ones,
you said refuse. I heard refuse to use. That would imply that they would,
refuse to use. Yes, you're under the
Sure, so you're
assumption that they
not-
would use
so-
something else. I'm just saying that they refuse to use the ones
so
they
then
prefer.
what? So then you're saying like things like they're such as their name directly, they
Or
then
they
that
Correct,
doesn't
sure.
really apply. I mean that's generally it's whatever. But like if they purposely were using pronouns that were inconsistent with their gender identity, and a teacher noticed that and understand the social transition, then that could be something that could be dealt with internally with the teacher as it relates to the caseworker and that student. Like, there's a bunch of options to interact with HIB and counseling.
So with that, Joe,
Well, of course
but
they
you
could
just
go
apply
through the
this to-
channels, but that doesn't answer the question about how you feel, Joe.
No,
I
I
don't care
think
about. I don't
that-
care
that's
about.
my
I don't
answer.
care about what the process of which how they would deal with it. I want to know what the answer is. Do you
There's
feel
no answer.
that every
no
child?
clean answer.
There is no answer. So that's what I'm trying to ask, because you
Yeah,
don't
there's
have
no-
an
it's-
opinion one way or the other.
My opinion is I would follow what's in my policy. So if my
You would follow
policy-
what's in the policy,
Yes.
regardless of whether it is not consistent with Civil Rights Act.
He's
even
just
if it was-
following
even if it
orders,
was- even if
okay,
it was-
guys?
Even if it was inconsistent with my religion as a Roman Catholic, yes, I would follow it.
so hold on. There's nothing wrong with like. There's not. Yeah, if you want to follow the rules or whatever, there's no. I don't think anybody
She had
has an issue.
I'm not to cut you off, Lactoid. She could have done that as well. She didn't have
So-
to talk to the principal. She could have made a personal consensus and then done that herself. So she could have, based on the complaint, she could have just used their names and been done with it. And then if the principal does something later, then she can go to that route of making the argument of religious beliefs. But that didn't happen.
Again, a lot of this stuff needs to come out because according to
Complaint 80, I can send you the complaint, friend.
Sure, but
No?
I can look at the complaint, but complaints don't always encapsulate the full fact basis.
The complaint is the actual the case that we're talking about.
I know.
The
No,
argument
I
based
know.
off of it.
I know what complaints are. What I'm saying is that complaints sometimes don't always fully capture the factual basis behind the lawsuit. Right? You allege only certain things in a complaint because they're legally relevant. You might leave out other things that aren't necessarily legally relevant in the statements by
Can I
her.
ask a clarifying question?
Once I'm done speaking, you can. Once I'm done speaking, you can.
Absolutely. Go for it.
So when you look at the statements made by her attorneys, for example, like multiple times, the picture that's painted is very different. It's not just like what it's saying is that she came to them willing to work out a compromise, and they were immediately unwilling to compromise. That's the position of her attorneys, the same people who drafted the complaint.
Okay, so specifically within this, which is Vivian Gautry versus, Jackson Local School District Board of Education, Christopher Deletto, Monica Myers, and Carter versus Vivian Gautry. There's a section that is called factual background. So why are they using the language of factual background? That's the question I was going to ask you.
Yeah. So, the factual background is to explain some facts of the matter, but you can't put everything in there, right? There's a whole there's a whole discovery phase that happens.
Sure. So then the question I have further then is within that, in paragraph 88, it says, quote, Mrs. Garrity did not raise the issue of transfer or explore specific potential accommodations because she did not expect that she would be forced to resign as soon as she explained her religious basis for being unable to participate in her student's social transition. So the question is, what other information could be brought out in discovery,
Sure.
specifically
So-
within that paragraph?
Can you read that again, Joe? Actually,
wait.
real quick,
No,
the first part of that.
You can post. I would like to actually, if you can post it. You said you could post it. I'd like to take a look at that. But that would be in line with what her attorneys have said, which is
Because I heard I read that
hold
literally.
on. This wouldn't be in line with what her attorney said, which was she went in there willing to compromise, wanting to speak, and the position that was given to her was no, like we're not going to compromise. Either you respect this or you have to resign. That was the statement that her attorneys are saying was given to her.
Sure. That's
And so how are you going to say that when they basically say we're not even going to argue with you? Like do this or resign.
That's
Just
not exactly
for the
You saw
record,
that
it's the
link
burden.
too?
For the record, it's the burden of the state to present accommodations, not her. It's not her responsibility to go to the state and say these are the accommodations that I'm willing to do so that we can be more in line. Like it's the state's burden to, or the school board in this instance, or principal, more specifically to say, well, here's some things we can do to resolve this issue. It's not her job to come up with compromises.
Especially when they're saying she has to resign otherwise.
You know, it's funny. It's funny you
Yeah, but
mention
it's
that
her
because
job
the
to follow
U.S.
the school
government
district's
just sued.
policy.
The U.S. government just sued Kroger. Are you guys familiar with that lawsuit? There was a couple employees that refused to wear their aprons because they had a heart on them.
Yeah.
And one of them even offered to put their name badge over it, and the other employee offered to get a completely different apron. And the United States government, eventually these two people were fired. The United States government actually sued Kroger because they lacked that accommodation. So I think for me, I draw the parallels between these two, and honestly, it just seems pretty clear cut and dry. You have to make
what
you
is
have
the
to make
heart- What is
exceptions.
the heart about? I'm lost.
It's a rainbow heart. Who's like a
Rainbow Heart,
pro
which
LGBT
was-
like flair.
Yeah.
Oh, got
So
it.
they were basically forced to make a political statement with their clothing to state that they were pro LGBT, queer theory, or whatever other things you might presume, right? Because it doesn't actually, it's not actually a statement that says exactly what you believe.
And so,
but-
Kroger was saying they all had to wear the thing.
Correct.
Yeah,
And the two employees in question, one of them offered to put the name badge over the heart, reasonable
What's
accommodation,
Kroger again?
and Kroger.
Grocery
Okay,
store.
K-R-O-G-E-R.
Grocery store.
Okay.
Grocery store.
Sure.
And the other offered to wear a completely different apron, and Kroger said no. And then the United States government actually sued Kroger on their behalf for breaking the Civil Rights Act. And so I draw parallelity
What was the
between the two
resolution of that
cases.
case?
They
Sorry
settled.
not to cut you off.
I believe it was like 180,000. I believe that they settled for the two plaintiffs. But
Okay.
so again,
Less sympathetic to that.
I think the question is: was a reasonable accommodation made on behalf of the teacher and the school itself? And I don't see it. And
No,
so therefore, from a
well,
legal
that's- hold on,
perspective,
wait.
it's black and white.
So
to
no, it's
respond-
not. It's not black and white because specifically within the factual background, which is why I asked the question of the factual background, both are true. And I'll read it again. Defendants did not explore the possibility of transfer to a different class, although defendant Dioretto had discretion to transfer teachers and transfer would be feasible given the total enrollment of the students and it lists the student number. But then also at paragraph 88, it says Mrs. Garrity did not raise the issue of transfer or explore specific potential accommodations because she did not
Stop right
expect-
there. Literally raise the issue. So to me, I literally interpret that as it was brought up, and she did not raise it as an issue, as if she was willing to actually
I interpret
transfer.
it as she just didn't mention it at all. That neither
Well, again,
party
so
did.
because there's more
Yeah.
context to that.
And it's the state's burden to do so.
So at 9:30, or earlier that day, or a day before, I don't remember. I'd have to scroll up to read it. She got notification, a bunch of other teachers around these particular students. There were 3 around their social transition. 2 were names, 1 were pronouns. Then at 9:30 that day, she went to speak to her principal about potential accommodations so that she doesn't violate her religious beliefs or constitutional rights. Then they had a talk. They were unable to tell Miss Gertrude exactly what her obligations were and explained that his own practice was to refrain from using any pronouns to refer to students who express their gender identities inconsistent with their sex. And then it goes on saying Gertrude, the defendant, in this case the principal, told Ms. Garrity he would look into the matter further, which he did, brought her back in, and then this brings in the other defendant, Carter, and then Carter was joined by the superior. So a bunch of people were involved with this, and then the resolution was that, and this is the quote, that she would be required to put her beliefs aside as a public servant. So this was an initial email, a meeting
And
with
that
the
right there is
principal.
illegal. I mean,
No.
we could argue all day wrong. Like that statement will fuck them in court entirely.
Wait,
It
why is that
could.
illegal?
Yeah, it's not.
It's not, but I mean, you
Yeah,
can walk me
so-
through
You have to
it.
put your
she-
political
she-
beliefs
this
aside.
is-
I mean,
Yes.
that's
No,
not
religious
Yeah.
beliefs.
Religious
Religious
Hold on,
beliefs, yeah.
She's a public,
She's a
she's
public servant.
She's working for the public school.
And the kids also.
Yeah, if
It
the
does,
school
and
decides
I
that
went
their
over this,
policy
and I went
is that
over
they're
this
going to be
before.
respecting pronouns.
I
then
went
yeah,
over this
she's gonna
before.
need
It
to put
is
her beliefs aside
irrelevant
and
if
respect
she's
the
a government
pronoun.
employee. It's irrelevant if
It
she's a government
absolutely-
employee.
It absolutely is
So that's
relevant.
not,
It is
I'll
not.
give,
No,
I'll give you an example.
the Civil Rights Act 1964 applies to anybody, including
Why should we be held
government
hostage by her
employees.
fucking?
I don't know
like,
why.
fairy
For the,
tale
I,
delusions?
you, got,
Like,
you guys
I don't
are
understand
focused-
why
Giga-
you're
Giga-
putting religion on this
Okay,
fucking pedestal.
No, because
so
this is
a science
a religious
teacher
issue.
Okay, something prime.
And you guys are under the
Yeah.
assumption that because she's a government employee, it doesn't apply. It does. The Civil Rights Act
according
does
to
apply.
your logic,
So
according to your
I
logic,
went
a science
Kate,
teacher that
Joe, Lactoid, then Scott. Okay.
according to your logic, a science teacher that is a Christian could teach that evolution isn't real because she believes in
No,
her-
again,
yeah,
That's a
your
red
logic.
herring because
No.
that's part of the curriculum. You're arguing semantics to make yourself feel good. It's irrelevant to the story. We're not arguing over curriculum here. It's a completely different subject.
Joe.
Okay, well, you just didn't get my point at all then. But
No, because I got your point. It was stupid. You're arguing over what is curriculum, of which the teacher, yes, has to abide by, versus something that is not consistent with the policies of the school
Well, there's school policy that the teacher also abides by. So one of my colleagues is Shia, and they're from a different school, and he prays 5 times a day, and they ran into problems with him having classes in the morning. So he went to the district and said, "Hey, I want to continue working here, but my current class schedule is inconsistent with the times that I have to pray." In normal situations, on like for certain years, it didn't matter because he didn't have classes during that hour. But then because his class got a little bit more popular, things got a little bit weird. So the district accommodated that and pushed his classes so that they were consistent with his prayer schedule. So you're saying that the district shouldn't have done that, or
Should have made accommodations for
Yeah.
his religious beliefs.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of making accommodations for religious beliefs. That's exactly what I'm trying to tell you guys, which is why I find it hilarious
Wait,
that you
why?
bring that up, because you're only proving my
Like, what,
point.
hold on. What's the line for that then? It's like, so what if there's like a very
That's
Catholic
what we're
or Christian
arguing.
teacher,
That's
or
what we're
like a
arguing.
hardcore
I-
Muslim
But
I
teacher
have
Joe,
a-
but
who
Joe
just
literally
doesn't-
just
who
argued
just
in favor
doesn't want
of religious
homosexuals in
beliefs.
their classroom.
I
And that doesn't-
respect.
hold on, that just doesn't want homosexuals in their classroom. Should we
No.
accommodate that teacher?
That is not, again, you
Why?
are, it's like the whole
Great
harassment
analogy,
comment. This is
actually.
irrelevant. It's not, because
No,
that's
no,
not what
it
the
is
teacher is trying to
Undue
say.
burden. Okay,
It's
like you
like-
guys are
it's
arguing.
like the
separate
code.
words.
Yeah,
We'll
sorry.
get you. We'll get you.
Thank
It's
you,
undue
Fabian.
burden.
Like, this
I
is
will
stupid.
finish
It's
my line of
undue
questioning,
burden.
but
We will
that's
get
fine.
to you.
It's undue. I'll just very quick. It's undue
Oh,
burden. Yeah, but we're going back and forth about something that's already settled,
Sure.
which is
Okay,
undue
great.
burden.
Great.
I just
Like
Thank
you're
you.
bringing
on
up
that.
cases that require a burden.
Prime
Thank
is
you.
the
This one
moderator
doesn't.
of this
Thank
conversation.
you. So Joe, finish what you're going to say. We do have to move on to Lactoid, to Scott, and then Doobie, if you want to jump in, I want to make sure you have time.
Yeah, so the reason why I brought that up is because in his situation, it was just between him and him alone. In this situation, you have this woman's personal religious convictions, and then you also have the honoring of the rights that the student wants. So those two things are in conflict. So on one hand, you could say, okay, maybe it's possible I could transfer to a different class, but then what do you think, what happens if the teacher runs into the same situation again, and then they run into the same conversation? It's just like they just keep transferring, because again, you cannot disclose religion as a reason why you can't do something. So like,
Did she not offer to refer to them in a
No,
neutral manner?
That was
No.
after the fact that our legal team.
This was after the fact.
Lactoid.
Well, I'm going to comment on that because it's technically true, right? So I have the complaint up on 80. Defendant Myers reiterated that as a public servant, Ms. Garrity must set aside her religious convictions aside, and that if she was unable to do so, she had no choice but to resign. 81. Defendant Carter immediately handed Mrs. Garhati a laptop and ordered her to draft her letter of resignation in the adjoining room for immediate submission. This all happened immediately. So I think I think that lines up with what her attorney is saying, where they basically told her, do this or you have to resign. And then after the fact, it does appear this happened after the fact. She said, well, no, actually, I'd be willing to do these things, but these are things that were never brought up by the school district. These were never explored. They basically told me that unless I did this, I must resign. Essentially firing her.
She froze up. She froze up in the face of pressure.
So she may have frozen up in the face of pressure, but here's the thing, though. When you're
It's not her responsibility.
Yeah, that's the problem here. Like, at least legally, it's not. I think that's, again, one of the issues here is that if you tell somebody you have no other choice, if that's the word that you use, you have no other choice, do this or resign, that language immediately precludes other accommodations, doesn't it? Because you're saying there's no other choice. And one of the choices here could be, I'm not going to use pronouns at all, or I'm just going to refer to them by their last names. The statement that was given to her precluded negotiation. That's the problem. Very clearly, she was being told that she couldn't explore these options at all. And then after the fact, she's like, look, I would have been open to exploring these options. Please let him. Like, I definitely would have. But they never even said I could. They basically said no, right? Either this or the highway.
Which again, she could have made that personal calculus of I'm just going to use their names and not bring it up.
It's
Like,
not
that-
her
that's easily an
responsibility.
option.
What part of that are you not understanding?
Well, no.
here?
So I understand. So Joe's basically saying that, like,
It's
look,
not her burden.
He's saying
It is
that
her burden.
he's
It's her
saying
job.
No, it's not.
he's saying she just should
It's
have.
not by law her responsibility.
To be
He's
very clear what I'm
He's saying
like-
she's well, it's going to be decided whether or not what the legal element is.
Yeah.
But what Joe is saying is that she should have done it, right? Which is a position, right? It's a position taken by some of the people on this panel. I think it's a difficult question. I think she's a very strong case, so especially the fact that they told her, you have no choice, do this or leave. But going back, one question that I asked that just wasn't answered, again, when it comes to the neopronoun stuff, I mean, is there a line? And if so, where and why?
Isn't that a separate issue though?
That is a separate issue.
I don't think
because
it.
either way-
I don't think it is though, because
No,
I could come up with a
It's the same
neopronoun
issue.
so ridiculous that none
Which
of
is
you
why
would
it's
want.
a separate
Okay.
issue.
No.
So
Here's let me
Why
finish.
does that make it a separate issue?
Let me explain why it's not a separate issue, because I can
Sure.
come up with a neopronoun so ridiculous that anyone in this fucking panel would not want to say it. They'd be like, "Look, I'm not going to refer to you with that. That's ridiculous."
Yeah, I
well,
believe
that's
you.
the
And the
exact same
burden-
situation she's in.
So
And the
okay, so we
burden
go. So
of-
we're gonna go to
goodness.
Scott, Doobie, and Ruminate. I think you want your.
Oh, I want an answer to that too.
Okay.
So it again.
Write it down so you
I
remember
guess
it,
I just.
please.
It's almost like I don't know why I have to reiterate a portion of my opening statement that is already like settled, right? We can't use other examples of things that do create an undue hardship or right versus things that don't. It's not her responsibility to come up with reasons after she's being told by the state, we will not compromise with you. It's not her responsibility to go, oh, but maybe there are some compromises here. Just like it's not the rape victim's responsibility to fucking over and over again say that there's other things she would do other than being raped, right? Like if they say no, if they force you to do something, they're forcing you to do said thing, right? Second, it's actually that's basically the whole fucking point. Like if it's their responsibility to come up with compromises, right? That offer reasonable accommodation because of her religious beliefs. And some of the people here think, well, her religious beliefs are getting in the way of what I want these woke schools to push onto children. And that's really what you're fucking saying when you say that it's the children's right to have their fucking pronouns recognized. What you're doing is you're making a political act against one ideology, Christianity in this example, versus your political ideology, and you're trying to act like that's not what you're doing. And it's just fucking gross because undue hardship is already a measure that we've had for decades. And that's what's in the law and that's what's in the Constitution. Well, technically, it's a Supreme Court test, but
Let's go
it's the
to
Supreme
made
Court's
up.
interpretation of the Constitution.
Doobie, the Ruminate.
I think that there has to be a line, right, when it comes to the neopronouns thing. I think if you say that there is no line or that it's a different conversation, that's like disingenuous. I think you need to deal with that if you're on the side of like respecting the pronouns, quote unquote. But on the other side, I think there also needs to be a line, right? I don't think that it's reasonable to say that someone could just pop up and say, "Hey, I subscribe to this set of like Iron Age fables that taught me this moral system, and that moral system disagrees with the modern culture, so therefore I'm not going to do what the policy is." I think there also needs to be a line there, and I don't understand why. I understand you guys are like pointing to current law. I think the current law should be changed. Why should we respect these religions whatsoever? Like, I don't understand why someone stating that they believe in a god and their specific god says this thing. It means that we need to treat this as like some serious belief that should be respected in public spaces. Like, fuck that. Like, why should we be forming our policy around it?
Yeah, so I
Doobie,
definitely
Doobie.
if
Most
I
taste thing I've heard Doobie say.
well, so yeah,
No, it's wrong.
that
and
was in
here's
my
why.
original statement, where it's like, yeah, the religion appears to be kind of like for a large majority of cases, like a get out of jail free card. And I just want to answer Lactoid's question that he posed of like, where's my line? And I would even just extrapolate this to just like, how do we engage with people on a personal level? As in like, you know, if you asked me to refer to you as whatever, as Lactoid, I would do that, and I would continue to do that. But if you asked me to refer you as something else, unless it's like reasonable, I would respect whatever that you wanted. But going to the extreme, if you said, well, refer to me and like basically my name is now like the entire alphabet in the English language, I would not be able to do that. And I'd be like, well, that is pretty unreasonable. And like, if we're going to continue any sort of interaction, you need to like accommodate me or like be less ridiculous.
Here's the problem with the reasonable person test in this situation. The reasonable person test somewhat assumes a level of homogeny of opinion, right? You know, what is the average reasonable person? We all recognize this, right? That's kind of the test. But you have half the country that thinks that if you use a different pronoun, you're being unreasonable, right? This woman believes that, right? That's like her foundational belief. So having like a good reasonable person test here is going to be unworkable.
That's why I sort of push back on the religious aspect. Like, I don't think we should be respecting her religious beliefs.
Well,
All right,
sure, well, if it's not based
I
on
have a
religion,
question for
though.
Doobie and Corey. Okay, here's the thing that really kind of irks me from time to time with people like you is, Doobie, for example, what do you think were the contributing factors to make you feel the way you do, to make you think the way you are? Your ideologies, for example, where did they come from? Where did they come from? Your ideologies, the way the way you think, and who you are. Where do they come from?
It's just culture, tradition, life experience.
You're right. Would you say that they are a combination of environmental factors and maybe possibly genetic?
Yeah, I'm sure.
I mean, there's literally no other answer, motherfucker. So it's those two, right? So here's the thing that I'm trying to argue. Whether your environmental factors, I mean, let's be honest, are probably the vast majority of the reason why you are the way that you are. Why do we discredit, then, religion, which once again is just another environmental factor? You, my friend, think because of who you are, due to how you were raised, who you grew up around, and simply speaking, you are just a product of your environment. Why then do we discredit someone simply because they have religious beliefs, which once again are environmental factors? I hate that. Corey, Doobie, you are no different. Anybody who is non-religious is literally no different in their ideology than anybody who is. You are the contributing factors of your thought is simply environmental. Whether that's religious or not, should not be a legal interpretation.
I understand.
I got to answer for you, Doobie, by
it's
the
the
way.
same reason. It's the same reason we discredit like cult leaders, right? Who want to marry like children. Say, hey, we understand that you're the way you are because of your environment and things that affect your genetics and shit like that. But we've decided that this way to be is a bad way to be, so we're not going to let you be.
No, we never did decide that. Once again, you're under that assumption.
When cult leaders, when cult leaders want to marry children, unless they're like an Islam, a Mormon or a Muslim, and we usually say, hey, that's a bad thing, cult leader. You can't fucking do that, and we put them in a cage if they try to marry children.
You're arguing morality, which is nothing but the collective wisdom of the community. It is not innate to the human species. And you, for example, if you step into a different country, are going to behave differently. Why? Because again, morality is not innate.
Growing up in Afghanistan, I might be fucking ghosts.
Because it was my turn like four sessions ago. So I just want to weigh in on this. Just a couple of things, if we could put a pin on it. So earlier, Lactoid and Joe and Gigadatum were having a back and forth over, and I think Scott as well, over the proposed alternatives. And that's part of why I'm sympathetic to this particular case, because I do think, I mean, I'm not an attorney, but I think based on the case that the lawsuit that her attorneys are making, that they'll be able to persuasively make the case that the school did not make any other sort of accommodations to the teacher. But I do want it said, I think Joe confirmed, she did not raise those concerns at the time. Now, you can say that the employer was obligated to do that and not the teacher in question, but I just want it out there that it was originally pitched that actually, no, she proposed alternatives. Hey, put me in a different classroom. I'll refer to people by different names. We have no evidence that that's the case. The evidence indicates that she's open to it now, but did not propose it at the time. So I think we need to put a pin in that and say that that's settled. But the second thing, it goes back to the discussion of civil rights. I agree clearly that Garrity, whatever, the teacher, clearly enjoys civil rights, but so too do the students, right? So that's the other issue. She's not the only one who's protected by the Civil Rights Act. So too are the students. And so the frustrating thing is the only civil rights that have been considered, particularly by the conservatives here, is the teacher. What about the students? What about the minors? They also are protected by the Civil Rights Act and also enjoy civil rights protections.
That's
so
not
I'd like
what we're
somebody
arguing
to respond to that.
Well, I'll respond to two things. The first thing, you're right, Ruminate, when you're talking about, you're right. And then the complaint reads that she likely didn't bring up the accommodations beforehand. That said, again,
did not, to be clear.
Right. But sure. That's what I said.
Paragraph 74, 75. But yeah, keep going.
But we also know the reason is because the school said no compromise, like no other option.
That's not true because paragraph 74 and 75 come before 86 and 88.
Hold on, we're gonna.
Mrs. Gertrude explained that she could not put her beliefs aside, and she did not believe she could be compelled to do so as a condition of public service. This is right before 73, after Ms. Gertrude explained her beliefs set forth in paragraphs 39 through 47. Defendants Carter and Myers told Ms. Gertrude that, quote, she would be required to put her beliefs aside as a public servant.
Right.
She made it clear that her convictions were fixed.
Dude, which
but they said
of the Civil Rights Act. I don't even know why this is legally speaking. This is not something to argue. We're just simply arguing semantics. Morality, we can argue all day long. and what is
Lactoid,
right
when
and
you
what
go
is
to
wrong.
answer, when you go to offer an answer about the civil rights protections for the students, I'd also
I haven't
like to
answered that.
know when you do answer, I would also like to know in the end, because I assume you're on the side of that the teacher's civil rights should take priority in this particular case. I would like to know why, if that's what you believe.
Are you asking me?
No,
No.
Lactoid.
So, okay. So 80 and 81 reiterated that as a public servant, Ms. Gertie must set her religious convictions aside, and that if she was unable to do so, she had no choice but to resign. Defendant Carter immediately handed her a laptop and ordered her to draft a letter of resignation in the adjoining room for immediate submission. They're not giving her an option. They're not bringing it up. And they're saying, like, you do this or you get fired.
She made it clear,
again,
which is why I cited
again,
paragraph 74 and 5, because that happened before what you just mentioned.
Yeah, none of that contradicts what I just said.
Okay, if you say so.
Yeah,
I think
none
what Joe was saying
of that.
that
I understand that she didn't bring it up before. What we're saying though is that she wasn't given.
No. I'm
I
saying
think
that
what he's saying is that she indicated that she would not be open to alternatives by saying that she would not set her beliefs aside. Joe, is that what you're saying?
Correct. Paragraph 74, paragraph 75.
Right, her belief is fine. And that's specifically referring to 75, which is to participate in social transition, right? To call them by the pronouns that she doesn't want to say.
Excuse me, clarification.
Are you referring to school policy?
73 and 74, not 74 and 75.
Can you
Well, no, but I think
talking about the specific policy and like talk about the principle.
I think 75 is important there because again, ultimately this, and you can disagree with the argument, but a whole position here now, because it's pretty it's pretty clear that she did not bring this up beforehand. The position is that she obviously couldn't because she was told that she had to do this or she would get fired.
She couldn't. She didn't want to. That's
okay. Well, we disagree on that. We disagree on that. I want to ruminate. I want to answer the second question.
So answer that question. I do want to work with what Dewey just said because I want to repass like the minutia of this particular case.
Yeah, when your employer hands you a laptop and tells you to resign, I mean, I don't know if you can get any more clear than that. But ruminate, when it comes to like the civil rights of the students, I 100% agree that like the civil rights of the students is like needs to be considered here. And this is why the idea of reasonable accommodation is so critical, right? Joe brought up an example of a teacher who had to pray 5 times a day and couldn't do it at some particular times. And so the school district got together and they said, okay, well, the students have a right to like a consistent education. And the teacher has like, a right to, their beliefs or whatever. What can we do to like not infringe on either? What can we do to like make it work as best we can? And in this situation, if they had taken the time instead of saying, draft the resignation letter, if the time had been taken to say, okay, refer to students by their last name, that's not violating the civil rights of any of the students, and that's not violating her civil rights. And you're muted, just so you know.
Yeah.
Sorry, just so I can steelman your position, make sure I understand it properly. Your opinion is if both parties had explored alternative options as opposed to just an immediate firing or resignation, there would have been a way to thread the needle to respect her civil rights and their civil rights. And that's why that was the alternative that you're proposing. Okay.
I am not in favor of letting a teacher be able to use pronouns to a student that they don't want to be called. But the teacher was more than willing to say, I'm not going to use pronouns at all. That's the correct answer.
Perfect. Let me just ask this. Because again, there's this, the idea of social transitioning, right? And multiple medical authorities and psychiatric authorities and pediatric authorities, there's a consensus there. And that I don't know what that means to you, but let's just take it for the sake of argument. If they say, look, when people have preferred pronouns, misgendering them is obviously like a severe violation of that. It's deleterious to their mental health. And there's, again, high levels of suicidal ideation, all these things. But even if you don't deliberately misgender them, you don't use their preferred pronouns. Like you try to take that third option, like, hey, look, I'm not going to deliberately misgender you, but I'm not going to use your preferred pronouns. I'm just going to call you by your legal name or something else. If that is considered like a violation of social transitioning because you're still not doing what they prefer, do you think that she should be obligated? Do you think that the teacher should or should not be obligated in a public school to use preferred pronouns if the AMA, the American Pediatric Association, all these people say that that's best for their mental health? given that they're a marginalized group with high rates of self-harm and suicide and all these things.
I'm skeptical as to whether or not it's consensus, but I'm willing to engage within the hypothetical that we're assuming it is. I don't know. I'll have to think about that for a second.
Okay.
So I'll get back to you.
Okay.
So I'd like to
I can answer it.
Okay,
ask
you
because
answer
we
it then,
read
Doobie,
Yeah.
because I do want to move away from the minutiae of this case, because not everyone can participate
Sure.
in this legal question.
Well, I had a colleague who did that, where instead of honoring a student's pronouns, they just used their first name. And we later found out when they left the district, he was completely just like overtly, just kind of like based on his religious beliefs. Not like he didn't feel like honoring it, and this was lying, but it was never like a thing that we knew internally. Like we only found this after the fact when he started doing some like other cool stuff. But it's like that again, like that's like kind of my sort of like reservation here, and that if she was looking for a possible solution, I don't understand why bringing up religion mattered. I understand that she has religious beliefs and those religious beliefs are potentially in confliction, but she could have easily just used first names and then crossed the bridge there. Like she could have just used first names to these students in the classroom, and you don't have to bring in your religion, you don't have to bring in all this other nonsense, and then just like run functionally. And then if it becomes an issue of social transition, then we can go down this road of like religious convictions and on the basis of religion. But she didn't do that. She just got the email and went straight to the principal explaining her claim of religion.
Let's go to Doobie, and I hear something in the background.
Not me.
Is it the porn on somebody's phone?
It's
Hopefully
Cake.
porn?
Cake turned on his mic in StreamYards.
Okay, Doobie.
Yeah, good job, Cake. So what I'm wondering, like ruminate. So, would you require that students who claim to need their preferred pronouns to be used for their mental health, mental wellness, would you require that they get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria or some kind of mental condition that would lead them to that position?
I don't know. I mean, on paper that sounds. Is my mic okay? On paper that sounds reasonable. Trying to get some sort of like trying to validate some sort of psychiatric background with that, but I don't know if that would place an undue burden on the student. I don't know what sort of complications that might involve because they may not want to out themselves as LGBTQ to their parents, assuming that they're a minor. I don't know, but at least in principle, I guess I don't have like a particular objection to that other than the potential stress and undue burden that it might put on a student to defend their identity. Like,
I mean, typically if somebody's asking for accommodations, right, they need to provide some kind of proof that they require the accommodations, right? Especially and with a topic like this, when we start getting to like xeno pronouns or neo pronouns, whatever the fuck they're called these days, or xenogenders, I think if that's like the standard, or if we get anywhere near that standard, we're going to run into a lot of people who just can't prove that they have a condition, who still want you to use their pronouns. And I'm wondering, like, if in those cases where someone calls themselves like dearkin or faykin or whatever, should the school still be accommodating to them? And should the school require that the teachers are accommodating?
Doobie, I'll be the first one to tell you that I can't articulate some sort of like absolute line here. I'll own that, and you can consider that a weakness in the argument. I'm happy to accept that. I think a lot of these things have to be litigated in a case-by-case basis, as things often are, either by legislative bodies or courts or policymakers. I don't have a hard line for you. All I would say is my gut instinct would be to defer to medical and psychiatric authorities, and the only objection I can come offhand in terms of your request, which is, okay, if you want me to accommodate your pronouns, I need some sort of psych evaluation or something to indicate that, according to a medical or psychiatric professional, that you are trans or non-binary. The thing that would jump out at me is, again, just the number one, the principle of the idea that you have to like medically defend your identity in a way that we really don't require anybody else to, number one. And number two, given that it's such a marginalized community.
When I'm applying for paperwork, I can put whatever gender I want.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
That's not true.
What?
That is true.
Well, no. What you're talking
If
about
I'm
is
applying,
special
if
treat-
legal
what you're
document from the
talking
government of
about-
the United States, I can put whatever gender I want.
If it's inconsistent with other documents, you run into a
Are
problem.
they asking for
But if
sex?
you
or
Ah,
consistently-
there you
if
go.
you
It's gonna be like some
Wow.
kind of test.
If you
right?
consistently assert it, then there's a
Sorry to
different case
interrupt. I
there.
was just bringing up a point. But yes, go
I
ahead.
have
Well,
no idea
I
what
mean,
that point is.
you're-
You can
I don't
line
know
it
either.
out.
Are they asking for sex or gender? Because there is a distinction.
I'm saying the United States
Yes.
government does require proof in the form of maybe even at least consistency. You can't just randomly change your gender,
Correct.
as far as
and
I'm
then,
concerned.
but people
And therefore,
aren't-
again, so I just find it funny that you guys just discredit the fact that we
I
would
have
Gender
no
identity-
possibly consider
Gigatim,
medical
I have
proof.
no idea what you're trying to allude to, but I guess I'll try to walk through it the best of my ability. If somebody feels like they can't check a box that's appropriate to their gender identity, they're not just going to check it and call it a day. They would probably, I would assume, go through the measures so it could be legally changed and consistent. This is
You're
how
right.
I've known every single trans person to do, but they're not going to a doctor to get some medical paperwork to confirm that. Like my state now does it.
I
for
simply
reduced
said
cost,
that
if
I
not
simply
free.
said that requiring some sort of proof is
No,
somehow
and
discredited
let me piggyback
immediately.
here.
But then again, that's what we do legally.
Well,
Let me
said
piggyback
you
here.
can just. Oh my goodness.
Go ahead, Scott. We haven't heard from you in a while.
Let me piggyback. So what Gigadatum is really like found, right, without naming, is the fact that this is special and it is treated completely differently, right? My son is autistic. He has an IEP, right? Someone that's blind has special accommodations. They go to a doctor. They every other disability that you could possibly have, the school would need proper documentation of this and the parents would be involved. But see, it's David Halpern in queer theory that says that identity, that queerness is an identity without an essence, right? That it's actually gender abolitionist at its full philosophical conclusion, because this is not about medical issues. This is not about suicidality. This is not about appropriate outcomes. This is not about science or data at all. This is about ideology. And what this woman has done is she has come across a political philosophy that has infected the fucking schools. And that's why, under normal circumstances, it would have said, hey, look, you're Jewish. We have a policy that says you can't wear hats in the school. But I understand because you're Jewish, it's a reasonable accommodation for you to wear your yarmulke at school. But this specific thing that's not a part of curriculum, by the way, right? So Garcetti doesn't apply here. Okay. If it was curriculum, it would be different. She was hired to teach a curriculum. But what we're talking about is school policy, and all the fucking rules go out the window once you come up against critical pedagogy. And that's why this person is being punished instead of having a reasonable conversation. We're like, hey, you have certain opinions about our policy. We're going to come up with some type of compromise, because it's not really about the policy. It's about getting people like her out of education so that we can push forward our ideology.
Well,
I'm
again, I want to
gonna push
reiterate
back
that
to the
I think
idea
there's
that I
I'm
I
sorry,
really
go
want to
ahead,
push
Joe.
back to the idea that all trans people experience gender dysphoria, and therefore, if you align something that's different than your gender identity, you need to take a test. I know that's like not overtly being alluded here, but that's some like really cool stuff, and you can investigate that on your own time. But I'm fairly certain that
Yeah, I already
not all
stated
trans
that
people
opinion. David Halpern,
experience
queerness is an
gender.
identity without an essence. That's the fucking bullshit.
Joe,
If
Right,
you're talking
but
about people with
okay,
persistent,
I was not,
consistent
just to be
gender
clear,
dysphoria,
Fabian,
it's
I
very different
wasn't
than the
just to be clear,
ideological
Fabian,
fucking
I
kid
wasn't
being able to
directly
take over the
talking
class.
to you.
Joe?
I was just talking to Giga Tatum and you, sort of like in combination, because you piggybacked off of each other. So I wasn't directly addressing you and everything, the totality of what you said. I did a accumulation of what you both said. So if you feel like I was addressing you directly, I'm sorry. That wasn't my intent.
I'm just pointing out that it's ideological bullying by children of the school system and the teachers and the system itself against this teacher. The idea that some child can be transgender without gender dysphoria. It's fucking stupid.
A child can be trans without gender dysphoria. I don't know if you.
Joe, would you apply this to xenogenders too? Like, is there no limit for you?
You're pretending to be
Why do we
stupid.
keep trying
If
to
a kid
go
went to school,
xenogenders and nenopronouns
well, because
and try
we
to spread this
okay,
outside
because
of the
these
reality
things
of what's
exist.
happening.
People who identify this way. Don't say it outside of the reality.
We can move
People
on.
who
We can move
identify
on
this
from
way
this. I'm not gonna-
absolutely
I'm not
exist.
gonna
We've run
answer.
into them on this fucking panel.
Yeah, because
No,
I'm
we don't need to
crushing
run
you
on.
on
We
the
don't need-
fucking
we don't need to move on.
theory
So
that you
if a kid
refuse
was
to
in-
fucking
okay,
acknowledge.
I'm frog gender now.
engaging. It's cool.
I'm frog gender.
Joe,
Please stop. I'm frog gender, and you need to use frog pronouns for me. Should you require the teacher to use those pronouns?
I said we could move on from
Okay,
that, Prime. I'm good.
I would bite
Yeah,
that
okay.
bullet and say, no, it's silly. We can draw a line. I would
I-
bite that bullet.
I'm not actually. I got an answer to you. I've been thinking about it. assuming in the hypothetical that well, look,
Who
just
are you
take it
answering?
take it as a fact that like by engaging in the social transitioning of this
I'm
individual.
sorry. Are you answering me? You
Yes.
said answer. Okay, I'm with you. All right.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I'm going back to that one thing that I deferred. In the situation in which you have a student in class who has an issue and wants to be referred to a particular way or something, I think I am on board that if it is true that it is provably beneficial for the child's mental health to be referred to by any pronoun, and I'll go even further actually. If this has been diagnosed by like psychologists and like assuming that they're not captured, which I think is a whole different discussion. But like there's an objective psychiatrist, an objective doctor who take a look at this kid and say, look, this kid needs to be referred to by this pronoun. And in fact, maybe also this different species. All right, maybe I might be willing to bite the bullet that maybe the teacher should have to. Maybe if the kid wants to be referred to as like a different race as well, right? So like we all know the story of like Rachel Dolezal, for example. If there's like a little white kid who's like, if we can prove that like it's mentally good for him to be referred to like as a black kid, the teacher should maybe have to. And you're muted again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm just trying not to cough all the time. So if I may, because you said, you were referring to a specific diagnosis for a specific person. By the way, I appreciate your good faith and your charity. I really do. Let me ask this, because I don't know. I don't even know if that's possible. I'm cisgender, so I've never been in this situation. I don't know if a psychiatrist would ever say something to the effect of, it's my professional medical opinion that in this particular instance, it poses a risk to the subject's health if you don't refer to their particular pronoun. Now, what I do know is that just, again, the consensus of organizations is that as part of number one, social transitioning helps reduce trauma, stress, and suicidal ideation, number one. And
Republicans as well.
I'm sorry?
Nothing.
Who said that? I didn't see who spoke.
It does matter.
Oh, okay. And then number two, that referring to preferred pronouns is part of social transitioning. So that's my understanding of the logic, that it's part of a treatment plan that helps reduce in terms of probability that a trans person or non-binary person will hurt themselves or kill themselves or think about it. So let's just assume that that's a matter of probability, not a particular instance, not a particular student. Would you bite the bullet then? If you were persuaded that the medical consensus is that preferred pronouns are part of social transitioning reduces the probability of self-harm and suicide, would you want teachers to use preferred pronouns in public schools?
It gets tough though, because I think at that point I would just prefer to again maybe just have the kids who have this problem diagnosed and treated specifically, as opposed to a sort of catch-all. What I'm thinking about it, the reason why I'm kind of coming to the conclusions I'm coming to is, normally we don't just hand Adderall to every kid that walks in the classroom and sits down. But if you have a few kids that like are diagnosed like by an objective psychiatrist who's like, this kid needs Adderall for this reason, like we've measured his brain, he's got chemicals off or whatever the fuck, and we got to give this kid a specific treatment, and we tell the teacher, hey, can you give this kid these drugs or whatever. Well, even in that case, the teacher might say, look, I'm not comfortable doing that. Could you have somebody else do it? I don't know.
Teachers can't
Well,
administer
nurse would do it.
medicine.
Yeah. So maybe that's not the best.
nurse
Maybe that's not the best. Maybe that's not even the best analogy, though.
Well, you would agree, I assume, there's a difference between a pronoun and something as pharmacological with like Adderall, which has side effects, neurochemical side effects, that if you give somebody Adderall who doesn't need it, that there are potential neurochemical
Same
side
is true with
effects.
pronouns.
So that could be
Seems true with pronouns.
that's the issue, right? So the thing could be true with pronouns as well.
Social contagion.
The social contagion, and all we know. I mean, we know some things
I'm
about
sorry,
like averages. We don't know
clarify?
things about.
I'm sorry, could you clarify what you mean by social contagion? I'm sorry. As a side effect, lactoid.
No. So the idea of social contagion and this idea of like a prevailing culture within schools, if reinforced, can basically, not going to use the word problem, but can like create the situation in which this is more common. And so, like, for example, I mean, what was it, Scott? Like in California, more than 30% of Gen Zers now are non-binary, something along these lines. I mean,
40% identify as LGBTQ plus.
Yeah, 40% now, right?
It's radically different, and most of them are identifying as non-binary or
Yeah.
Almost like
bisexual.
an environmental
The
factor,
problem-
wouldn't you say?
The rates
Yeah,
seem to
well, I
be
mean,
like
it's obviously-
non-binary.
There's obviously an environment, right? So the thing is that like if you could just as easily say that the data is not widely available on the fact that we do know that individuals desist, right? And so like, what is the desistance rate? Well, what we know is that there's like anywhere between like a 30% and 90% desistance rate, depending on how you define it, right? So some people will identify, and then a majority of those people will eventually just go, oh, I'm gay, I'm comfortable in the body that I'm in. And then a small minority will turn out to just be cis heteronormative, right? So the problem is that if you start love bombing children for identifying with an ideology, and the school system is structured around, isolating them, keeping secrets from their parents, socially transitioning them, creating a power imbalance between the structure of the family, right? Kind of a problem there. We could get into the whole Marxist rabbit hole on that one, but nevertheless, I'll set that aside and simply say that what this can do is this can lead a child and a parent, that eventually the parent comes to the table to the social transition. And we've seen tons of videos from hospitals and different things where, the entire staff of a hospital will work together to go to a parent and say that the only available solution that you have to do if you don't want your kid to kill themselves, right? The Ruminate made these same junk science arguments about, the correlational idea of suicidality, and then say like, what do you want? Do you want a living son or a dead daughter? And then you start getting into medical transition, and these things are permanent and they have permanent side effects. So if you want to talk about Adderall as having permanent side effects, I think you could just as easily make a consequential analysis that having school policies that force everyone to affirm a child's gender identity through an ideological stance has physical side effects as well.
So
And
you
even,
can,
even,
we'll
if not,
see.
even if not recommended by a psychiatrist. Or
so
psychologist.
Ruminate, you can quickly respond, but I do want to get to Corey, and then I want to ask like two questions.
Sure. So number one, I didn't say permanent. I don't know what the side effects are pharmacologically of Adderall. When it's misdiagnosed or misprescribed.
It can cause problems.
Yeah, it could be.
Some of them are permanent.
Yeah, it could be permanent.
Permanent
could be short-term, I
tics
don't know.
can happen. Yeah.
Number two, even if I grant you that there's this risk of social contagion, in the worst case scenario that it leads to some sort of, I don't know, Marxist ideological capture of public schools and this widespread power imbalance between students and teachers, even granting that that's a possibility, I guess I'm still not persuaded that because we measure things in degrees, right? So are you saying that that's as likely as potential pharmacological side effects of misprescribing someone?
No, I'm saying
something like
no. What I'm saying is that the data is informed by an ideological bent, and we have really trash data. Like we have decades of research on transgender people, right? But almost all of the research that we have is with individuals with persistent and consistent gender dysphoria. What we don't have is a ton of data on individuals in this much larger category of like non-binary and trans people, and this massive boom that we've had. And the problem is that we have some from like NIH in England that show desistance doesn't really occur for about 7 years for male to female and about 5 years for female to male. And so like we don't know what the actual outcomes of these things are. Instead, what we do is we take old data from when this was not socially acceptable, right? Where like if you were trans, you had to fight against the system to like insist your identity, right? You had to say, look, since I was 4 years old, I have felt this fucking way, and I'm 19 years old now. Like, give me my fucking things, right? Like somebody like Buck Angel, right? That like had to fight over and over and over again to be able to transition medically. And so the problem is that we don't actually know that. When we talk about things like, what we're going to do is we're going to compare suicidality, right? Well, the problem is that what if you have autism? What if you have a cluster B personality disorder, such as narcissistic personality disorder or BPD or covert vulnerable narcissistic personality disorder, which is at rates sometimes 40 times higher than cis heteronormative people, right? And what ends up, or you have ADHD or autism, you have fixating disorders. And so what we don't know is that the changes in suicidality might be a temporary thing from love bombing or from fixing the fixation disorder, right? And giving them something to focus on. And then it gets better as they pass because they're fixating on passing. We don't have the long-term variables here. And so
Okay.
the problem is that you're
Wrap it
appealing
up.
to data that we just don't have.
Okay, so we're gonna go to Corey.
I'll be quick. I'll do my best to be quick. Just a couple of questions, Lactoid, to understand your position better. So would you require, let's say, a diagnosis of the child if you want, let's say in this case, like compel the teacher or a teacher to, participate in their social transition? Would you require they go through like a diagnosis process?
Yeah, but I also wouldn't limit it to gender transition. I'm dead serious that for race or people like cat people are into that stuff. If that's actually critical for their mental health.
So again, to understand your position better, what if it's something potentially innocuous, where it's saw a child that just, instead of their name being Robert, they want to be called Roberta? Would you be like, I need a diagnosis now?
If there's some reason why the teacher is deeply uncomfortable using a nickname, I think the only way that teachers should be compelled to call them that nickname would be some kind of diagnosis or some kind of medical reason why you have to call them that nickname. Otherwise, the teacher could just say, sorry, I'm calling you by your full name because that's,
Can I just say,
for
period?
some
I
reason.
don't believe children, literal minors, should have the ability to tell a teacher what to do, period. Is that such a hard take?
They can tell them sometimes what to do.
I think they should be able to refuse a lot of things from teachers.
Yeah.
Not refuse. What? I'm saying no. Again, what is with it? It's a panel on just literally going every which way and avoiding the actual thing that I said. I never said
have no clarity.
No,
in
I never
anything
said
saying,
the teachers. I never said anything about the teacher saying anything. I literally said, is it so wrong that the teacher can literally just deny whatever request a child might have because they are inevitably a minor, of which you are an adult and you have the responsibility to teach the child. And maybe, again, I'm just under the assumption, or again, maybe I have this odd ideology nowadays that perhaps children don't know what the fuck they want. I mean, that's a crazy concept to have these days. Why are we giving so much weight to children when they literally don't know what the fuck they're talking about?
Generative concepts, generative themes.
Because it's their education,
Freudian education,
and making sure that we give them an educational environment that keeps them safe as they're going through that. It should be a priority.
Safety has nothing to do with it. Why? Again, this is just a red herring. What the
curiosity, fuck? Just for the sake.
I mean, you can yell all you want, but that's
generative concepts, generative themes.
That's cool guy, Prime. I don't know where you found this guy, but keep him around. He's a cool guy.
Giga, just to clarify, you don't literally mean that teachers should be empowered to refuse any request from a teacher.
I just don't understand why all of a sudden today, in 2022, we give so much weight to
Year
what
of
a
our Lord.
child wants. Because inevitably, once again, they are minors. And I think we've all can understand that, yes, as we age, we do mature. And as we mature, we realize the decisions we made as children are not inherently the good ones.
Some people don't mature. I think it's pretty evident.
Well, sure, but you still recognize that minors still enjoy certain rights and protections and liberties as well. And so I assume you.
I mean, naturally, under extreme circumstances, yes. I'm not advocating for abuse or anything like that.
What does that mean?
You're just saying it's too lopsided.
You took a hard stance, and now we're
no. I'm simply saying, if a child walks into the classroom one day and wants to be called something particular, we are literally debating whether or not the child should have that.
Kids don't do that, and kids don't do that. So you're good.
Yes, they fucking do.
My question is,
another cool guy, by the way, really cool guy.
My question is again, why all of a sudden do we give so much weight to the decisions children make?
It's their education. It's not the teacher's education.
This has nothing to do with education. Again, are you guys staying on track?
Why are we? You're not making sense, and you can walk me through it. Why it's not about education? If you
pronouns have nothing to do with education.
Conservatives said the same thing after the invocation of child labor laws.
Lactoid wants to check. Lactoid wants to do blood tests on black people. So that's really cool.
I can sit here and argue.
He's not convinced. He's not convinced.
Here's a question: Do you think kids are less disciplined these days than they were 20 years ago?
Test. What? Okay.
How do you test people? You said earlier. I want to push on this.
Well, no, you missed the whole idea of my point. What I'm saying is if a psychiatrist says this kid will be better off mentally if they're referred to as a black child,
But
then
maybe-
under your logic, you should have to refer
Yeah,
to them
but
as a black child.
Right, but the thing is, oh my goodness. Okay, that's cool.
Okay,
Well, I mean,
I'm
what's
gonna
the answer?
try.
That's really
I'm
cool.
see how
gonna,
silly
I'm gonna
things can
try
get?
a question.
Wait, what's the answer? Is
Oh, no. So
I'm
racial dolls?
Thanks. All right, so my friend Johnny Scarlett, who I love very much, hey Johnny, popped into chat, a queer person themselves. They asked this: does the panel have thoughts on the language we use for queerness being insufficient? I personally see gender as a synthesis of having a physical body and living socially. It's interesting to me as a queer person that so much of the panel's language right now is very clinical. Yeah, like so
I think it was cynical.
cynical. Sorry, did you say
I love
cynical?
this one.
Oh no, clinical. It says very clinical.
Oh, it's clinical. Oh, okay.
Yeah, no problem.
I mean,
So
crap.
if
There's
you
a-
have any answer,
Prime.
Yeah.
Prime. When you go deep into queer theory, you'll find the idea of a gendered soul. You'll eventually get to the point where you realize that the ideology that's being pushed is not one of clinical. It's not one of science, and it's not one of objectivity. It is about, it's again, this is why I cited Halprin and his idea of queerness as an identity without an essence. It is an attack on the very idea of heteronormativity, or the idea that gender or sexual orientation exists at all. And that is why this person feels captured in their body. It is their soul is captured in their body. It's all mystical thinking.
Prime, you know goddamn well you're not going to think about this shit outside of the times you go live.
Almost
Come
religious.
on. You're going to go about your day, and then you're going to hit go live and do what we all the streamers do. Cool guy. man, cool guy.
Okay,
I mean, unless
like
you
so.
are. I don't know. Like, you're thinking about queer theory when you're going out doing your thing, and then during the day, you know.
So
Well, I'll just quote Carl Jung to that and say that people don't have ideas have people. The philosophy speaks through them.
Some philosopher from out academia.
Yeah, but I don't think. But gender is a social.
Joe, I know you
concept.
get scared when people
Oh,
actually know
boy.
the theory
Prime
and they
is
can call you on your bullshit.
responding,
you know.
but you know,
Yeah.
that's cool.
So I want, and everyone want to hear your opinions on this. Like, gender is a social concept, and the sex is the would be the closest to a medical concept, right? That's the thing that's based on a solid form, but the gender, we socially constructed that, and so the fact that a person might want to move between their socially ascribed roles, I mean, yeah, that wouldn't be necessarily clinical.
The problem
Right,
is
but they
that
should-
the word social construct is doing way too much heavy lifting here, right? It's just like saying race is a social construct, and yet we exist. We understand that there are like clines. We understand that there are like families and groupings, and that race has some basis in reality, right? And that we also understand that
No.
race, like the idea that Obama is considered a black man, even though he's half white, is where a social construction kind of like occurs here. The same thing is true with gender, right? Like it has like it is very obvious that female, right, is a sexual characteristic, right? Like it is, we have a homeostatic property cluster analysis of female, right? Like, and we understand that that is a thing in biology. Yet, if gender is fully socially constructed and that it has no tie to the biology, right, then it is a meaningless thing because gender is referring to a role that we've socially constructed around females.
So
Right?
race
So
does.
it's not fully
So a race is completely a social construct. It doesn't have any basis in reality. We have a bunch of characteristics that we.
So when am I being invited on all black
So-
everything?
Yeah, that's fine. So I've socially decided to tell you to go fuck yourself, right? That's my social
okay,
decision
yeah.
there. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So
okay.
but we there's a bunch of like external characteristics that we've just happened to group together for historical and political reasons. And those have consequences, real consequences, because we react to those social constructs. But no, they don't have any genetic basis. And yes, you can.
Are you referring to race when you say this?
I said race. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Can you show me one clinical trial that or a scientific conclusion that says that race has nothing to do with one's intelligence or behavioral instincts?
It doesn't.
Wait.
Unless
You
we're
can't.
back in
No.
unless we're back
Anybody
in
who thinks
the-
otherwise is bullshit. There's not one conclusive study that says otherwise. And if you think so, once again, you're arguing against
Wait,
your own fucking
sorry.
ideology. Because if you want to believe in the science,
Black
you
people
cannot
are
find one study that says that race has nothing, zero to do with behavioral or intellect.
Yeah.
they're Like,
What?
what year is this? Let me check my calendar.
No.
What?
Again, so
Are you about to
this is
start
why.
quoting,
No,
like,
I had this very
chronology?
question on my debate royale. All
What are
right,
you
I hate
talking about?
when
I'm gonna
truth.
mute you. You're good.
I hate when
Keep going,
truth.
King.
I hate when truth and science, all right, is hit with a moral dilemma. And frankly speaking, again, there is no conclusive evidence one way or the other. However, you guys want to discredit it simply because of your morality, and I don't agree with that. I believe we should pursue truth, inherent truth,
Yeah.
scientific
so
truth,
what
regardless
are the
of what the moral
non-debunked?
specifics.
What are the
And you cannot say-
non-debunked? What are the non-debunked experiments that that do say something?
Please share
do
the
link
studies.
these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please,
So what
yeah.
you said, like, there's nothing that doesn't break that link. Okay. Right. What conclusively establishes that link? Please go ahead.
But that's the thing. You're dealing in absolute truth, in which case it does or it does not. I simply say that, you know what, there is no conclusive evidence to support either way. And therefore, I'm not going to deal in
Okay,
absolutes
fine.
like
That's
you do.
not how science works. It's just
That is
FYI.
exactly how science
know.
works. If you cannot say with absolute
That's right,
certainty,
Corey. Flex
you have
that
a theory
PhD.
and you have
Flex
facts,
it.
two of which can be
Flex it,
different.
Corey.
Yeah.
You
So,
want
and I was
biomedicine,
asking
right?
something fucking very different, right? So whether race
No,
exists.
but when you make a statement under the assumption that is, again, not scientifically proven, I have an issue with that.
Sorry, hold on. What was my
Oh,
statement?
You're so full of shit.
Repeat
Your
my
eyes are
statement.
brown.
What was my statement?
You said, did you or
Not
did you
you,
not?
not you,
say
Scott. Not you,
race is
Scott.
not
You,
based in biology at all?
Scott, not you. Giga. What was my statement?
You were dealing with race and how
Look at that
race
grin.
is simply a construct and that there is nothing tied, physically speaking, behaviorally speaking, between races. There's nothing.
I didn't say anything about behavioral, right? I didn't mention that at all, right? Simply that it's not it has no true genetic basis. That these are simply a group of characteristics, and if you examine,
So no race
so
exhibit
if you
genetic
if you
characteristics different
if you
from others.
examine those populations, right, for those characteristics that we have established here in the West, right, then you'll see that there are plenty of exceptions that completely break the rule. It's not actually a real thing, and then it's further undermined by other groups, other nations having their own racial categories that are completely different from ours. So yes, this is a thing that was made up. And if you're talking about whether there are behavioral characteristics within some sort of population, and maybe some sort of intelligence group, some sort of link between intelligence between some sort of population, sure, maybe, right? But that population isn't strictly bound within race.
There's other environmental factors that can explain those discrepancies, and you're just describing them to race.
You're referring to
This is
there are obviously
misinformation.
environmental factors, right? And trust me, all right.
Okay,
what's the
dude.
guy's name? But anyways, people have been trying to find, for example, factor X. Factor X deals into the discrepancies and explains why these discrepancies
I'm
exist.
definitely muting
And-
you now.
Oh my god, are you fucking retarded? Like, what are you talking about?
You're
You're gonna mute me because I brought up a literal scientific term? Is that the kind of person you are?
Please-
Is that
please
you're so
explain the
embedded in your
scientific term,
ideology
please.
that you can't exactly refer to someone?
Yeah,
in an
finish your
actual
point.
study?
That I want to go to Doobie and I want to go to Lactoid. Yeah.
You are the problem with America.
Okay. All right. Is that your end of your statement? then?
Not you, Prime. I'm saying Joe.
Yeah,
He's just
sure.
gonna turn someone off that he disagrees with.
Fair enough. Okay. Let's go to Doobie, and then Lactoid.
I think I mostly agree with Scott, but I guess the question to follow up Scott's statement would be like, is this a useful social construct that we should hold on to, right? So is heteronormativity something useful that we should hold on to, and if it is, why, right? And why is it more useful than what gender queer activists are proposing?
So the idea that there are genders in existence, like, is it
Well, you said-
useful? Like, is there any
Yeah, you said-
utility in believing in the existence of genders? I would say the
Correct.
fact that we exist means that we propagated. So, like, an understanding of gender there probably helped.
Yeah, but I think
It's hard for me to
how is that-
propagate
you
with a
can
dude,
propagate- Well, hold on, but if that's because it's harder for you to propagate with another male, right? But if you had
Mhm.
another male who was a woman, right? It was a
Mhm.
woman with a penis. You'd also have problems like propagating with that woman. But that woman could go out and find another woman that didn't have a penis, had a vagina, and have sex with that woman and produce a child. Right. So I think they just say, hey, the issue there isn't gender or like a lack of heteronormativity. It's just genitals, right? And if we can say, hey, these people tend to have these kind of genitals, those people tend to have those kind of genitals. Maybe in the future, any kind of gender could have any kind of genitals, because people are going to swap around, and we can't really like. I think that like we need to figure out like why it's useful to
Right.
be able
It's
to say,
useful
hey,
because
if I have a
it's
man,
useful.
I can guess that he's going to have a penis.
It's useful because biological males and biological females are different, right? Will you admit that there's a difference
course.
between male and female?
Yeah.
Right. And will you admit that the differences are not simply just in like physicality, that there are psychological differences that are informed by hormones, that are informed by the body, that are informed by
by the social conditions that they're raised in.
None of these factor into biological sex, by the way. That's not a definition of biological sex.
That's not what I'm saying. Like, what is it that you would like to say? This is not an argument against me.
No, I agree. It's not an argument. I'm just like, you bring in like hormones and all that stuff when trying to like, what sounds like trying to ground, some sort of definition of biological sex. That's all.
No, I'm not grounding the
guess
definition of biological sex. What I'm saying, I'm assuming that biological sex is real, right? And that it has real outcomes in the world. And therefore, because it is real and it has real outcomes in the world, it is there's some utility to recognizing reality as it is. To be anti-reality is not helpful here.
Right.
I want to ask.
So I guess wait one second. Can I just really quickly? Scott, I'm wondering, like, so if we had like a society in which the gender roles were swapped, right? So females born took on all the typical gender roles of males, right? In Western society. I mean, you'd probably agree that at the end that when one of these females reaches adulthood, she's going to have a set of behaviors, a set of like mental tendencies, behavioral tendencies that are fucking night and day when compared to current modern Western women, right? Like, she's going to be behaving far more like we'd expect a man to behave.
Potentially, like, I don't know that that's actually true, right? Like, we can look at egalitarian societies, and the more egalitarian a society is in terms of gender disparity, the more the differences between men and women grow, right? So in like Sweden and Norway and places like that, we actually find more. We actually find more male engineers, more females in female-oriented jobs, because as the society attempts to push egalitarianism, what we find is that the biological innate differences tend to actually grow. Whereas the exact opposite is true in societies where it's the opposite, like Rwanda and places like that, where you actually find a lot more females in those positions. So like, I don't know that your example is true, that this person, that you could even swap them. Because I don't know if the environmental pressures are enough to be able to kind of flip things on its head.
I mean, I'd say that you had.
I don't know. I'm just looking at the data, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Like, we don't have a society we can point to where it's like this kind of like fantasy hypothetical that I'm talking about, right? But I can't imagine anything in the modern day, right? I think you'd have an argument if we were talking about like caveman days where people had to go out and hunt like fucking tigers and shit. But in the modern day, I don't think there's anything that's holding back a woman from doing everything that a man can and should be able to do from if she's raised that way from birth, right? She can crawl under cars, she can play football, she can do all the things that men can do, right? So I'd wonder if, I mean, like,
so no, this is bullshit, right? Like, an individual female can usually do any of the things that a man can do, but we're talking about we're talking about society. We're not talking about an individual, right? This is where your fantasy, the fantasy that breaks down, right? Because like, if we look at like aggression, for example, right? Like, men tend to be more aggressive than women, right? But like, if I just pick random people out of the street, I'm going to be wrong if I always choose the male between who's more aggressive, like 45% of the time. But I'm going to be right like 55-60% of the time. The difference is at the extremes, right? And so when you say men, that any woman can do anything that a man can do, or that any man can do anything that a woman can do, it's like, that's true if you're talking about the gender role, but that's not true when you're talking about the extremes. There's a reason that prisons are overwhelmingly full of men, because at the extremes it's like 100 to 1.
Yeah, but the argument would be that our society teaches men to be aggressive. It teaches kind of toxic version masculinity, where aggression
Yeah, but that's
is
just
actually
junk science and data. I dismiss with your
encouraged,
bullshit.
right? Where when the
Yeah, but that's
boys are
dumb.
fighting each other and rolling around in the dirt, it's hey, the boys will be
Yeah, but
boys.
that's
It's a good
now
thing.
you're getting into
Or when your
anti-science.
son
That's not
pops up and,
anti-science.
he's got into a fight at school.
Anti-science.
He's got a black eye.
Anti-science.
The question you should
Anti-science.
ask him is what the other kid looks like, right? So
Yeah,
so
anti-science. I don't
it's
care
not-
about your
why is it
anti-science position.
anti-science? Why isn't it? I mean, you're just rejecting
The idea
there-
that-
like there's
I'm-
some kind
I'm
of social
rejecting-
influence on why men are
rejecting-
more aggressive
no.
typically.
I'm rejecting the bullshit aside that you're trying to do here, right? For fun. On the idea that aggression is solely based in a social constructionist lens. That's just not how reality works. Like there are differences between men and women. And this shouldn't be a controversial fucking thing to say. Like gender roles are different from society to society. They're different based off of environmental pressures. They're different from the culture. They're different from the religion. They're different from different beliefs. And yet gender roles exist because these groups, by and large, with some outliers, are very different. And so they describe and attach themselves to a biological reality that is a difference between the genders. Yes, in some societies, men behave one way, right? If we go back to the 1800s in Russia, we're going to find a fuck ton of dudes wearing high heels, right? Because gender is a social construct, right? And if that same person was transported here wearing high heels, we'd look at them as androgynous or feminine in some capacity, right? But that doesn't mean that the gender role doesn't exist because there is a difference, because biological reality is real.
Let's okay. Well, let's go to Lactex, I promise. But then Cake, you next.
Yeah, I'm going to be ambitious. I'm going to ask 2 questions, but they're going to be quick, I promise. Prime, the first one is for you. If I had a study or some kind of opinion that showed that it would improve my mental health if you referred to me as a black man, would you do it even if you felt like you were lying to me?
Yeah, I mean, probably. I don't have to be clear, I don't really have a problem with Rachel Dolezal calling himself black.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
hashtag trust the science on.
So that's fair. That's fair enough. Ruminate. My second question for you is, there's been a lot of studies that show that religious belief actually improves mental health. That people who are religious are happier. Do you think that teachers should have to teach religious, even if they think it's a lie, even if they disagree with it? Should they have to teach their students religion in order to improve their mental health, even if it's not true?
When you say teach religion, you mean like the history of it, or like proselytize?
Indoctrinate them, because that's what the studies show is good for their mental health.
Oh, there's a loaded answer.
I would say no, because in that case, number one, gender identity is a mutable characteristic, whereas religion is a choice. And I don't think that that the United States has a legal or moral obligation to indoctrinate children in a particular religion. And then there comes the question, which religion would you teach? So,
hold on, pause. You believe that gender is an immutable characteristic, right? It is inherent to their biology, right? So why would you be against in any way, shape, or form them being diagnosed?
I don't think, unless I'm mistaken, I don't think that's what immutable means. It just means that it's like not changing. Like you don't choose your gender.
Well, legally, religion is, and also legally, it's
so
also.
Then you ought to be able to discover it in the brain.
Well, it's also
you ought to be able to discover. You're saying
religion
true
is also
trans
immutable,
exists,
though.
and some people are not true trans.
Religion
is immutable?
Legally an immutable.
Yeah, so legally, and this is the reason why religion is like incorporated within the Civil Rights Act, is because the legal definition is not just what you can't change; it's what you can't change or what you shouldn't be expected to change, right? And religion falls under that. I feel like the question about whether or not you can change it is somewhat of a dodge of the point, which is, should teachers have to engage in something that they personally don't think is true in order to benefit the mental well-being of their students? Again, if let's say I gave you a study here, we'll make this easy. Like we can play into a hypothetical. I gave you a study that proved that if we had every teacher indoctrinate their students in Christianity specifically, everyone would be happier. If I gave you that study, would you be then in favor of it?
No, and again, for a couple of reasons. I'll take the immutable part out. So look, number one, Constitutionally, federally, and I think under the 14th Amendment, we also have protections against enforcing or the freedom of religion, the free exercise thereof, in terms of a particular religion or lack thereof. Number one, so you would have the legal and constitutional problem. Number two, the problem isn't just that using preferred pronouns makes people happier. It's that number one, the particular group
reduces suicidality.
There's a correlation between suicidal ideation and mental harm, and that the lack of gender affirmation contributes to that. So it's not like it would just be better for people to have their gender recognized. It's that the absence of that contributes directly to harm.
What if both
That's
contribute?
a spurious claim at best.
What if both of them, what if in the situation of indoctrinating the students with Christianity, I could give you a study that showed that the suicide drop was on a nation basis greater than having people have to use their preferred pronouns to address their students.
If you had a study, I'll just say this. Let's take the legality out of it. If you had a medical consensus that indicated that teaching Christianity not only would make people happier, make them more content, that not teaching Christianity contributes to probabilistic harm for people, then I'd probably bite the bullet on that, taking the legality aside.
Well, but the absence of the benefit would intrinsically have to assume that you're missing out on that lowered suicidality, right? By not indoctrinating children in Christianity, they are not as happy as they otherwise would be. Their suicide risk is higher than it otherwise would be, at least for the atheist children, right? So maybe you could say, okay, everyone has to have some religion because it makes you happier. We just can't have atheist kids anymore.
Definitely not.
I mean,
Those kids are
under the mental health train of thought, it's I don't know. It's very difficult to get away from that.
Let's go to Cake and then Corey, and we
let me get back to you on that, Lactoid. Let me chew on that.
I have a promise with that a problem with that premise that Lactoid presented, in that the idea that the studies I think I've seen some of them. I don't know exactly what studies you looked at, but I agree with you. They exist, where they talk about the benefits of being religious and how it. But what's not clear is the correlation and causation. What seems more clear to me is that the benefits are community and grief counseling and support systems. These are not things that exist solely in religious organizations, but they exist commonly in religious organizations.
But
So-
Cake,
What? Go
Cake,
ahead.
that the exact opposite could be said about suicidality reduction in social transitioning. Is that it's not clear that there's a causality there. You're correct, right? Read Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, right? The main argument is, social capital is decreased, networking, community, and then of course the idea of the amount of sexual partners people have before engaging in long-term relationships. These seem to be the things about religion that are protective factors, right? That make people it explains away most of the reason why religious people are happier, healthier, have better
Not all of it.
relationships. Right? Not all of it, but it explains a lot of it, right? But the exact same thing could be said about Ruminate's claim that suicidality is decreased when people go through social transition for these kids.
I'm not.
That there isn't good science that way either.
I'm not informed enough on that subject to have a strong opinion, to be honest.
That's fair.
So I'm not going to
It's a
respond.
great
to that.
answer. That's a great answer. It's an honest one. I'll give you that.
Yeah. But I do want to. My second question was going to be for you, Scott, because you spoke so eloquently before about your definition of biological identity and gender identity. It almost sounded like you were willing to accept that there could be something like a gender identity that is separate from your biological sex identity. Yes, no?
Well, I mean, if you were to press me on a definition for woman, for example, I would say a socially constructed role inherent to the adult human female, right? I wouldn't say just adult human female. I would admit that it's a socially constructed role and that there is interplay there, but that it is describing something. And what it is describing is societal socially constructed role that is explaining human female, right? It's tied to that. right? I would say, of course, outliers
tied.
exist.
It can be tied to it for sure. And like you said, outliers exist. So then, when we're addressing these outliers, which people in the LGBTQ community, especially the trans community, are definitely outliers. It's a small population. Why do we have such difficulty finding empathy for those people who find themselves so far outside the norm that they're constantly distressed by what they claim is dysphoria? Why are we so unwilling to accommodate a gender identity and just leave it alone and not call it a biological sex thing?
I have
answer
no
that just
problem with
briefly?
I have no problem for finding empathy with these people. I've done tons of interviews with D-trans people, done panel with Blair White and Buck Angel and Tulip Art and Taftage and Chloe Cole, and I've spoken to a lot of D-trans and trans people, and I have no problem with finding empathy with those people. If you're asking why you mean the people that are against it, I think that you'll find that a lot of conservatives are what I like to call family values consequentialists. And they go along with a lot of things. And the moment you start trying to indoctrinate their fucking children and start coming after them with crazy ideology, it's not about a lack of empathy for trans people or for people with gender dysphoria. It's about the ideology and the bullshit that's being pushed on their children. And once you start coming for conservatives' kids, I think you wake up the mama bears, and I think you wake up the guys that are content to hang out in their garage and go to their job, and all of a sudden realize, oh, it's time I get fucking involved because people are coming after my family. I don't think it's a lack of empathy for trans people specifically. It's a hate for the people that want to fuck with their kids.
Kika, if you want to quickly respond, then I got to go to Corey. He's been waiting patiently.
Go ahead.
I just, of all the talk that I've heard, I keep referencing one thing. Why do we think that we have this mentality nowadays? We should cater to the one. Is that necessarily a good thing?
We can move on from that if you want, but
everybody's under the assumption. Oh, little Timmy there in the school, wants to go by these pronouns. Everyone else in the world. So I always wonder, like, at what point in time is it just simply an exception in one person, and in what point in time, like, how many people do we require to bring up an issue before we actually take it seriously? And so that's
generative themes, generative concepts.
No, it's true though.
It really is
again, we cannot cater to everybody. Society would just collapse. We cannot do it. And so where do we draw that line? Simply, is it just a majority rule?
I mean, educators try their best and they practice. Like they're going to be perfect. They're not. There's no perfection in the practice, but like we try and we retry and we go back, try again, and then we do different policies.
And yet you argue with such passion as if there is one way to do things.
I never argue that there is one way to do things, but if you think that
seems to be the opinion on practically everybody on this panel.
That doesn't seem to be the opinion of everybody on this panel. But we can continue talking.
Gigadatum. I know it sounds wild conspiracy land type shit, but 480,000 citations. That's how many citations Paulo Freire has. Pedagogy of the Oppressed has over 108,000 citations. For the record, nothing Sigmund Freud has ever written, the father of psychology, along with William Bunt.
I was going to fight you on that.
Even approached that. Right. Okay. I think his highest citations, like on the id super ego, right? Like 64,000. Okay. The entire field is taken over by Freirean ideology. And you have to know this shit to understand why this is so pernicious.
It's more of a rhetorical question.
I have a question for you, Cake. What's the last philosopher you read?
The last philosopher I read?
I was talking to Cake, unless your name.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said Gig.
No, it's cool. It's cool.
No, go ahead.
Assert your presence. It's all right.
The most recent one I've read has been Kant.
When was that?
A year ago.
Okay. All right. What about you, Corey?
Probably Alan Bloom, but that's like me rereading stuff. If you can consider.
Why is this relevant?
I mean, it's not relevant. It's bullshit, especially since Joe himself. Especially since Joe himself has read Pedagogy of the Oppressed on stream before.
What? I've never read Pedagogy of the Oppressed on stream. What are you talking? Are you confusing black people again? Black people again?
Okay. Corey, here's your turn.
I'll be quick.
Let's see how many people I can gather that state that.
Corey.
So, Lactoid. So I think the scenario that you brought up earlier with Ruminate, I think is like a pretty good scenario. And I'll try to thread that needle where it's like you brought up religion and like, if there are studies that appear to show, a boost to mental health as a result of,
less suicide.
religious belief as some sort of moderating factor. And as we've talked about before, like, or as I've tried to convince you, where it's like it's not, as Cake brought up, it's not necessarily the religious belief itself that is like having all these positive effects, as in like there. So when you brought up the scenario of like, should a teacher like teach religion in the class, even though if they know it's not true? I would say no. What I would say is what I would be in favor for, and this is scientifically backed, of like teaching spirituality. I will fully concede that spirituality definitely appears to be important for human functioning and human well-being, and you don't need the religion as in to get all the mental health boosts. And I would encourage you to look into the literature on spirituality. It's super fascinating, and I
Can
think
you
you'll
define
find
spirituality in this context?
I can't define consciousness either, but it's
I'm
a
not
thing.
trying to I'm not trying to like get you. I'm looking
Like a
curious.
non-materialistic. There's something else there.
I would relate this to self-transcendence, and basically like basically being less
Conquering the
selfish.
lizard brain.
Yeah, that's why I would
The
totally
unitive experience.
yeah,
why
or
there's a lot of
or
evidence
feeling
that
one with
indicates-
humanity to a certain extent. Where it's like, yeah, I would be all in favor of teaching
I think
spirituality.
Andrew Tate told me that one time. I think.
No, right on. I guess
Definitely.
my mind like immediately jumped to like supernatural stuff, but the things you just expressed make a lot of sense.
So here, Corey, here's the issue though. Like I have looked at the studies, and like yeah, it's true that like there's a lot of other things that like have to do with it, but there's also the argument that religion in of itself may be a unique motivator for all those things, right? Because hey, like it makes it sure easy to have that level of community when your doctrine dictates that you do. And when your doctrine dictates that you should meet all the time to do this one thing that all of you are super into, you all have a shared interest, you all, have this same set of rules that are governing your life. Like, we can argue the empirics of it, but I guess I'll pose the same question to you, Corey. If I gave you a study, okay, peer-reviewed by all of your favorite authors or all your favorite researchers that said,
All my CRT theorists.
yeah, all your CRT commie people that you read all the time, okay? And they all sat down and they said, Corey, the evidence is undeniable. Indoctrinating kindergartners into believing that Jesus Christ is their Lord and Savior and died for their sins and rose on the third day literally decreases their suicide rate in a way that we just can't, like, it's controlling for all other factors. At that point, Corey, would you, if let's say you were a teacher, would you say, well, fuck, I gotta start teaching kids about Jesus?
And also assuming that the First Amendment doesn't apply, right? For your hypothetical.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I mean,
Yeah.
legally, the school district's probably going to get fucked on this one too. But
Yeah,
I mean, let's just
Just wanted to
assume
take
that,
that
like,
out.
yeah.
so I want to get through this so we can move on. So, but yeah, go ahead.
I'll try to be quick. So basically my answer would be yes, but I would teach the full concept, and this would be grounded in like, if the science says this, well, what does actually science say about belief, and like how do you evaluate evidence, and like the lack of evidence for any sort of like divine being, in that something can be beneficial and untrue.
Right. The same study shows that if you explain that to them, it removes the benefits. So you can't.
He's going to keep loading the study. This is
Yeah, I'll keep loading the study. I'm trying to boil down. The theory I'm trying to boil down to is: will you lie to save lives? That's it. That's the ultimate question.
And the theory that I'm boiling down to is: when will we get to topic 2?
We'll get to. Answer that one question, then we gotta go. We gotta move.
I understand. My answer, short: I don't know.
Okay. All right.
Based.
So, all right. Thanks for that. That was more explicit. I actually didn't think we would have much to say on that particular